Close your eyes and let yourself drift into the gentle embrace of history, where love stories unfold like whispered secrets in the candlelight of centuries past. Tonight, we journey to a time when the world trembled beneath the footsteps of emperors, yet even the mightiest hearts could be conquered by something far more powerful than any army. This is a story that bloomed in the shadow of revolution, flourished beneath the weight of crowns, and endured through the echoes of time itself. Picture, if you will, the cobblestone streets of Paris in the year 1795. The city breathes with the aftermath of revolution, its very stones still warm from the fires of change. Carriages clatter over ancient pathways, while merchants call out their wares. And somewhere in this tapestry of voices and dreams, two souls are about to discover that destiny often wears the most unexpected disguise. The air carries the scent of fresh bread from bakeries, the distant sound of church bells marking the hours, and something else entirely. Something that feels like the beginning of forever. This is not just any love story. This is the tale of Napoleon Bonaparte and Joséphine de Beauharnais, two hearts that found each other when the world seemed determined to keep them apart. It's a story that will wrap around you like the softest blanket, carrying you through moonlit gardens and whispered promises, through letters written by candlelight, in moments that changed the course of history itself. Let your breathing slow as we step into their world, where every glance held meaning and every touch rewrote the future. Our story begins not with grand fanfare or military parades, but with something far more intimate. The quiet rustle of silk against marble floors, the gentle tick of a clock in a Parisian drawing room, and the soft murmur of conversation that would soon give way to something extraordinary. Joséphine stood by the window of her salon, watching the evening light dance across the gardens below. She was a woman who understood beauty in all its forms, from the way shadows fell across rose petals to the delicate art of conversation that could make hours feel like minutes. Born Marie-Joseph Rose, Tachère de la Pagerie, on the tropical island of Martinique, she carried within her the warmth of Caribbean sunsets and the gentle rhythm of ocean waves. Her childhood had been filled with the sound of trade winds through sugarcane fields and the laughter of children playing beneath palm trees that swayed like dancers against azure skies. Even now, years later, in the bustling heart of France, she sometimes caught herself listening for those familiar sounds, feeling homesick for shores that seemed a lifetime away. The revolution had changed everything for everyone, but for Joséphine, it had brought both tragedy and unexpected freedom. Her first marriage to Alexandre de Beauharnais had ended not in divorce, but in the terrible finality of the guillotine during the Terror. She herself had felt the cold touch of imprisonment, spending months in the shadow of that same fate, never knowing if each sunset might be her last. Yet somehow, through a combination of luck, charm, and the mysterious workings of Providence, she had emerged into a new world where a woman of wit and grace could carve out her own destiny. Now, at 32, she moved through Parisian society with the confidence of someone who had stared death in the face and chosen to live fully in spite of it. Her salon had become a gathering place for the interesting minds of the age. Artists, writers, politicians, and philosophers all found their way to her drawing room, drawn not just by her beauty, but by something more elusive. She possessed that rare gift of making others feel as though they were the most fascinating person in the room, even while she remained the undisputed center of attention. On this particular evening, the conversation flowed like wine around topics of art and literature, politics and philosophy. Joséphine listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering insights that revealed a mind far sharper than many gave her credit for. She had learned early that intelligence, like beauty, could be both a weapon and a shield, depending on how one chose to wield it. The candlelight caught the auburn highlights in her hair and the knowing sparkle in her eyes as she navigated the social currents with the skill of someone born to it. It was into this scene of elegant domesticity that Napoleon Bonaparte first entered her life, though neither of them could have predicted the seismic shift that was about to occur. He arrived not as the emperor he would become, but as a young general, barely 26 years old, with eyes that burned with ambition and a mind that moved faster than most people could follow. He was small in stature, but enormous in presence, carrying himself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and where you're going, even when the rest of the world hasn't figured it out yet. Napoleon had been born on the island of Corsica, a place where the Mediterranean sun baked ancient stones and where the concept of honor was woven into the very fabric of daily life. His childhood had been shaped by stories of great men and greater deeds, by the belief that destiny was something you seized rather than something that happened to you. From his earliest days, he had devoured books on military strategy and ancient history, dreaming of campaigns that would echo through the ages and of glory that would outlast empires. The French military academy had polished his natural talents, but it was the chaos of revolution that had truly unleashed his potential. While others saw only destruction in the upheaval of the old order, Napoleon saw opportunity. He understood that in times of great change, the bold could rise higher than birth or wealth had ever allowed. Each victory on the battlefield had been a step toward something larger. Each strategic success, a building block in the construction of a legend that was still taking shape. Yet, for all his military brilliance and political acumen, Napoleon remained, in many ways, surprisingly naive about matters of the heart. His previous romantic encounters had been intense, but brief, passionate flashes that burned bright and died quickly. He approached love the way he approached everything else, with total commitment and an almost frightening intensity. When he cared about something, he cared completely, whether it was a military campaign or a woman's smile. The evening they first met was one of those perfect autumn nights when Paris seemed to glow with possibility. The air carried just enough chill to make fires welcome and conversations linger longer than usual. Napoleon had come to Joséphine's salon at the invitation of a mutual friend, though he might have preferred to spend the evening studying maps or planning his next campaign. Social gatherings often felt like battlefields to him, requiring different strategies, but no less careful planning than military engagements. When he first saw Joséphine across the crowded room, something shifted in the carefully ordered universe of his ambitions. She was holding court near the fireplace, her laughter creating ripples of warmth that seemed to draw everyone closer. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and she moved with a grace that made even simple gestures seem like choreographed poetry. But it wasn't just her beauty that stopped him in his tracks. It was something indefinable, a quality that made him feel as though he had been searching for something without knowing what it was, and had suddenly, unexpectedly, found it. For her part, Joséphine noticed the young general almost immediately, not because he was the tallest man in the room or the most elaborately dressed, but because of the way he seemed to create his own gravity field. Conversations paused when he spoke, not out of deference to rank, but because of the sheer force of his personality. There was something magnetic about his intensity, the way his eyes lit up when he discussed his ideas, the passion that infused even his most casual observations. Their first conversation began, as many great love stories do, with the most ordinary of topics. Napoleon, perhaps feeling slightly out of his element in this salon full of artists and intellectuals, mentioned his recent military campaigns. Most women of Joséphine's circle found military talk tedious, but she surprised him by asking thoughtful questions about strategy and logistics. She had, after all, been married to a soldier and understood that behind every grand victory lay thousands of small decisions and careful preparations. As the evening progressed, their conversation deepened and ranged across topics from literature to philosophy, from the future of France to the nature of happiness itself. Napoleon found himself speaking more freely than he had in months, sharing thoughts and dreams he usually kept locked away behind the armor of professional necessity. Joséphine, meanwhile, discovered that beneath the general's famous intensity lay a mind of remarkable breadth and a heart capable of surprising tenderness. The other guests gradually faded into the background as the two became absorbed in their exchange of ideas and observations. Time seemed to slow and stretch, the way it does in those rare moments when two people discover they speak the same language of the soul. Neither of them noticed when other conversations quieted, or when curious glances began to be exchanged among the other guests. They were creating their own world in the space between their chairs, a world where wit and intelligence danced together like partners who had been waiting their entire lives to find each other. When Napoleon finally took his leave that evening, he carried with him more than just pleasant memories of stimulating conversation. He carried the beginning of an obsession that would reshape not only his personal life, but the very course of European history. As he walked through the quiet streets of Paris, his mind raced, not with plans for military campaigns or political strategies, but with images of auburn hair catching candlelight and the sound of laughter that seemed to promise something he had never dared to hope for. Joséphine, meanwhile, stood at her window long after the last guest had departed, watching the empty street and thinking about eyes that burned with such passionate intelligence. She had met many ambitious men in her life, but none who combined such fierce determination with such unexpected vulnerability. There had been something almost boyish about his enthusiasm when he spoke of his dreams, yet something undeniably powerful about the way he commanded attention without seeming to try. Neither of them slept well that night, though, for the most pleasant of reasons, they had found something neither had been looking for, something that felt both thrilling and terrifying in its potential. Love, they were beginning to discover, was perhaps the only force on earth powerful enough to conquer even the most unconquerable hearts, queerable hearts. In the days that followed their first meeting, Napoleon found himself in the peculiar position of being distracted by something other than military strategy or political maneuvering. His aides noticed that he would pause mid-sentence during briefings, his gaze distant and thoughtful, as though he were listening to music only he could hear. Letters that usually received his immediate and decisive attention would sit unopened on his desk while he composed something entirely different, his pen moving across paper with an urgency that had nothing to do with matters of state. He wrote to Joséphine with the same intensity he brought to everything else in his life, but tempered now with a tenderness that surprised even him. His letters were not the casual notes of polite society, but passionate outpourings of a heart that had discovered its capacity for devotion. He told her about his dreams, not just of military glory, but of quiet moments and shared conversations. He described the way her laughter had stayed with him through sleepless nights, echoing in his memory like a melody he couldn't quite shake. Joséphine, for her part, found herself equally enchanted by this unexpected correspondence. She had received many letters from many admirers over the years, but none had possessed quite this combination of intellectual fire and emotional honesty. Napoleon wrote to her, as though she were not just beautiful, but brilliant. He asked her opinions on everything from literature to politics, treating her thoughts with a respect that was both flattering and refreshing. In a world where women were often valued more for their silence than their insights, his letters felt like invitations to be fully herself. Their courtship unfolded through these written exchanges, like a dance performed in ink and paper, each letter built upon the last, creating an intimacy that grew stronger with every carefully chosen word. Napoleon would seal his letters with wax that bore his personal insignia. But more importantly, he sealed them with hopes that grew bolder with each passing day. He signed them simply, Bonaparte at first, then your devoted Bonaparte, and eventually, in moments of particular vulnerability, your Napoleon, who thinks only of you. Joséphine's responses were equally revealing, though written with the subtle art of a woman who understood that mystery was often more powerful than revelation. She shared stories of her childhood in Martinique, painting pictures with words of tropical mornings and evening storms that rolled in from the ocean like distant thunder. She told him about her children, Eugene and Hortense, and the fierce love that had sustained her through the darkest days of the Terror. Her letters revealed a woman of depth and resilience, someone who had learned to find joy even in seasons of sorrow. As autumn deepened into winter, their meetings became more frequent and more intimate. They would walk together through the gardens of Paris, their conversations weaving between the practical and the profound, like paths through a carefully tended maze. Napoleon would tell her about his latest campaigns, but also about his childhood dreams and the loneliness that sometimes accompanied great ambition. Joséphine would listen with the kind of attention that made him feel truly heard, perhaps for the first time in his adult life. There were moments of perfect understanding between them, times when words seemed unnecessary and presence was enough. They would sit by the fire in her salon after other guests had departed, watching flames dance in the grate, while winter wind whispered against the windows. In these quiet interludes, Napoleon would forget about conquering Europe and think instead about conquering the heart of the woman beside him. Joséphine would study his profile in the firelight and wonder at how someone so young could carry such weight on his shoulders, yet still find room for tenderness. Their love story was not without its complications, of course. Joséphine was 6 years older than Napoleon, a difference that raised eyebrows in a society obsessed with propriety. She had children from her previous marriage and social connections that were both asset and liability in the shifting political landscape of post-revolutionary France. Napoleon's friends and advisors worried that attachment might blunt his ambition or distract him from the destiny that seemed so clearly within his grasp. But love, as both were discovering, has its own logic that rarely aligns with practical considerations. When Napoleon looked at Joséphine, he saw not obstacles, but possibilities. Her maturity complemented his youth. Her social grace balanced his sometimes overwhelming intensity. Her children became, in his mind, not complications, but the beginning of the family he had never thought he wanted. Every perceived difficulty transformed into another reason why they belonged together. The proposal, when it finally came, was as unexpected as everything else about their relationship. They were walking through the Tuileries gardens on a crisp December morning, their breath visible in the cold air. Like small clouds of shared intimacy, snow had fallen during the night, transforming the familiar paths into something magical and new. Napoleon stopped suddenly beside a fountain that had been silenced by winter, its water frozen into crystalline sculptures that caught the weak sunlight like diamonds. He turned to face Joséphine, his hands taking hers with a gentleness that belied his reputation for decisive action. His words, when they came, were not the grand declaration she might have expected from a man who commanded armies, but something far more precious. He spoke simply and directly, telling her that he had discovered something worth more than all the victories he might ever win. He asked her to marry him, not with flowery speeches about destiny or empire, but with the honest confession that he could not imagine his future without her in it. Joséphine's response came not in words, but in the smile that had first captivated him, now deepened by understanding and acceptance. She had learned, through hard experience, to be cautious with her heart, but something about Napoleon's earnest intensity made caution seem not just unnecessary, but almost insulting to what they had built together. When she finally spoke, it was to say yes, with a simplicity that matched his proposal, though her voice carried undertones of joy that would echo in his memory for years to come. Their engagement was announced quietly, without the fanfare that would later mark Napoleon's rise to greater prominence. For now, they were simply two people who had found in each other something rare and precious in a world that often seemed designed to keep such discoveries apart. They planned their wedding for the spring, imagining a ceremony that would be intimate rather than grand, focused on the promises they were making to each other, rather than the audience witnessing those promises. But history, as they would soon learn, rarely waits for personal happiness to find its perfect moment. Even as they made their private plans, larger forces were already in motion that would sweep them both toward destinies neither could have imagined. Napoleon's star was rising in the military hierarchy, and with it came opportunities that would test their new love in ways they had not anticipated. The young general who had fallen in love over autumn conversations and winter walks was about to be offered command of the army of Italy, a position that would require him to leave Paris and the woman who had become the center of his world. The campaign promised glory and advancement, everything he had worked toward since his days at military academy. But it also meant separation from Joséphine at the very moment when being together felt most important. As they discussed this opportunity during long evenings by the fire, both recognized the impossible choice it represented. Napoleon's ambition was not vanity, but duty, a calling that went beyond personal desire to something larger and more demanding. Yet, the thought of leaving Joséphine felt like tearing away part of himself, abandoning the happiness he had just discovered for an uncertain future on distant battlefields. Joséphine understood the weight of his decision, perhaps better than he did himself. She had learned during her first marriage that loving a soldier meant accepting that duty and desire did not always align, that sometimes the greatest act of love was encouraging the beloved to pursue the path that honor demanded. Yet this knowledge did not make the prospect of separation any easier to bear. Their discussions about the future took on an urgency that made every moment together seem precious and fleeting. They talked about love and duty, about the price of greatness and the value of simple happiness. Napoleon spoke of his fears that military success might come at the cost of personal fulfillment, while Joséphine shared her own concerns about the loneliness that seemed to be love's most faithful companion. It was during one of these conversations that they made the decision that would define not only their relationship, but the course of European history itself. Rather than postpone their wedding until Napoleon's return from Italy, they would marry immediately and face whatever came next as husband and wife. The decision felt both impulsive and inevitable, the only choice that honored both love and duty without requiring either to be sacrificed completely. The decision to marry before Napoleon's departure transformed their quiet courtship into something that moved with the swift precision of a military campaign, yet retained all the tenderness of their most intimate moments together. There was something beautifully fitting about the urgency of their plans, as though love itself had learned to march to the rhythm of history's drums. They would have only 2 days to arrange everything, 2 days to transform a dream into reality before duty called Napoleon away from the city that had brought them together. Joséphine threw herself into the preparations with the same grace she brought to everything else, though now there was an added sparkle in her eyes that spoke of anticipation mixed with the sweetest kind of anxiety. She chose a simple dress of white silk, elegant in its restraint, adorned only with small pearls that caught the light like captured moonbeams. There would be no elaborate ceremony, no grand cathedral filled with dignitaries and politicians. Instead, they would marry in a small civil ceremony, surrounded only by those closest to them, creating memories built on intimacy rather than spectacle. Napoleon found himself surprisingly nervous as the day approached. This man, who could face enemy cannons without flinching, now worried about stumbling over his vows. He spent hours practicing what he would say, though he knew that when the moment came, his heart would choose the words his mind had been too careful to plan. He selected his finest uniform, the blue coat with gold braiding that made his eyes seem even more intense, and took special care with every detail, wanting to be worthy of the woman who had agreed to bind her future to his, and the morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, with that particular quality of light that seems reserved for days when the ordinary world transforms into something magical. Paris awakened slowly around them, unaware that 2 of its residents were about to make promises that would echo through the corridors of history. The city's ancient stones seemed to hum with quiet approval as carriages began moving through streets still damp with morning dew. They met at the modest office where the ceremony would take place, and the moment Napoleon saw Joséphine in her wedding dress, he felt his carefully prepared composure desert him entirely. She looked radiant, but more than that, she looked happy in a way that made him realize how much sadness she must have carried before they found each other. Her children, Eugène and Hortense, stood beside her like small guards of honor, their faces bright with excitement at seeing their mother so joyful. The ceremony itself was brief but profound. Each word spoken with the weight of complete understanding between them. When Napoleon took Joséphine's hand in his, he felt the tremor of emotion that ran through her fingers, and when she looked into his eyes as they exchanged vows, he saw reflected there all the hope and trust he had never dared ask for. They promised to love each other through whatever trials might come, to honor each other's dreams, even when those dreams led in different directions, and to find their way back to each other, no matter how far duty might carry them apart. The kiss they shared when the official pronounced them married was gentle and sweet, full of promise rather than passion, a seal on vows that felt both new and eternal around them. Their small gathering of witnesses smiled and wept in equal measure, understanding that they had just witnessed something rare and precious. Even the winter sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to approve, casting everything in gold that made the simple room feel like a cathedral built of light and love. Their wedding breakfast was held at Joséphine's house, now their house, where friends raised glasses of champagne and offered toasts that ranged from the humorous to the heartfelt. Napoleon found himself laughing more than he had in months, the tension of military responsibilities temporarily forgotten in the glow of matrimonial happiness. Joséphine moved among their guests like a gracious queen, but her eyes kept returning to her new husband with a contentment that made everyone present feel they were witnessing something beautiful and true. But even in the midst of celebration, the shadow of approaching separation hung over their joy like clouds gathering on a distant horizon. Napoleon's orders had arrived that morning, confirming his departure for Italy in just 3 days. 3 days to be newlyweds before becoming a military wife and an absent husband. 3 days to build memories that would have to sustain them through months of letters and longing. They spent those precious days like misers hoarding gold, reluctant to waste even moments on sleep when consciousness meant being together. They walked through Paris, holding hands like young lovers, though now they wore wedding rings that caught the light with each gesture. Napoleon showed Joséphine places that had meaning to him, quiet corners where he had dreamed his ambitious dreams before she entered his life, to make them seem both larger and somehow less important than the simple miracle of loving and being loved. Joséphine, in turn, shared with him the intimate geography of her daily life, the market where she bought flowers for her salon, the church where she had prayed during the darkest days of the Terror, the garden bench where she sometimes sat in the early morning to watch the city wake up around her. Each shared location became a landmark in the map of their marriage, places they could return to in memory when distance made physical presence impossible. Their conversations during these final days together took on a different quality, deeper and more urgent than even their most intimate exchanges during courtship. They talked about their fears and hopes for the campaign ahead, about how they would maintain their connection across whatever miles would separate them. Napoleon promised to write every day, and Joséphine promised to fill her letters with all the small details of home that would make him feel present, even when absent. They also spoke about the future beyond the Italian campaign, dreams they could now share as husband and wife rather than merely as lovers. Napoleon described the house he wanted to build for them someday, with gardens where Joséphine could grow the flowers she loved, and a library where they could spend quiet evenings reading together. Joséphine painted pictures with words of the family they might become, the children who might call Napoleon father, and learn from him the values of honor and dedication tempered with kindness. On their final night together before his departure, they sat by the fire in what had become their favorite spot, watching flames dance in patterns that seemed to mirror the emotions flickering in their hearts. The silence between them was comfortable, but charged with awareness that tomorrow would bring change neither could fully predict. Napoleon held Joséphine's hand, as though memorizing the feel of her fingers intertwined with his, while she studied his profile in the firelight, as if creating a portrait in her mind to sustain her through lonely evenings ahead. When they finally spoke, it was not about the separation looming before them, but about the certainty they had discovered in each other. Napoleon told Joséphine that meeting her had taught him there were victories worth more than military triumphs, conquests of the heart that required not force, but surrender. Joséphine replied that loving him had shown her that courage came in many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing was to trust another person with your complete happiness. They made love that night with a tenderness that spoke of both celebration and farewell, creating memories that would glow in their separate darknesses, like candles lit against whatever storms might come. Sleep, when it finally claimed them, was peaceful and deep. Their bodies curved together in perfect trust and contentment. Even unconscious, they seemed reluctant to let go of each other, as though their dreams recognized what morning would demand dawn came too soon and too bright, flooding their bedroom with light that made further sleep impossible. Napoleon woke first, as was his habit, but instead of rising immediately to begin the day's preparations, he lay quietly, watching Joséphine sleep. Her face in the morning light looked younger somehow, peaceful in a way that made him want to protect not just her safety, but her capacity for such serene trust. When she finally stirred and opened her eyes to find him watching her, her first smile of the day was so radiant it nearly broke his resolve to leave it all. Their final morning together moved with the strange slowness that time adopts when every moment matters. They shared breakfast with an almost ceremonial attention to small rituals, as though the simple act of pouring coffee or passing marmalade could become sacred through careful observation. Napoleon's uniform hung ready in the next room, like a reminder of the world beyond their domestic happiness, but neither of them looked toward it until absolutely necessary. The carriage that would carry Napoleon to his new command arrived precisely on schedule, its driver discreetly waiting while husband and wife said their private farewells. Their goodbye was not dramatic or theatrical, but rather marked by the quiet intensity of two people who understood exactly what they were risking and why it mattered. Napoleon promised to return to her as soon as honor allowed, while Joséphine promised to be waiting with the same love that was sending him away. As his carriage rolled through the gates of Paris toward the Italian frontier, Napoleon carried with him more than military supplies and strategic plans. He carried the knowledge that somewhere behind him, a woman who would become his anchor in the world was beginning her own campaign of waiting and hoping. The letters he would write to her from distant battlefields would be love letters disguised as military dispatches, chronicles of longing dressed in the language of duty and honor. Joséphine, meanwhile, stood at her window long after the sound of wheels on cobblestones had faded into the general noise of the awakening city. She was no longer simply the widow Beauharnais, or even Joséphine the salon hostess, but Madame Bonaparte, a title that carried both pride and responsibility she was still learning to understand. Her days would now be measured not just by the rhythm of Parisian society, but by the arrival and departure of letters that would carry her husband's voice across whatever distance separated them. The Italian campaign that called Napoleon away from his new bride would prove to be the making of his military reputation. A series of victories so swift and decisive that all of Europe would be forced to acknowledge the arrival of a new kind of general. But for now, as his carriage carried him toward destiny, he was simply a young man in love, watching familiar landscapes disappear behind him while dreaming of the day when duty and desire would finally point in the same direction, leading him home to the arms of the woman who had taught him that some conquests were worth more than empires. The letters began arriving within days of Napoleon's departure, each one a small miracle that seemed to carry not just words, but the very essence of the man who had written them. Joséphine would recognize his handwriting on the envelope from across the room, her heart quickening with an anticipation that never diminished, no matter how many times the ritual repeated itself. She developed the habit of saving these precious communications until evening, when she could read them by candlelight with the same reverence others might reserve for prayer. Napoleon's correspondence revealed facets of his character that even their most intimate conversations had only hinted at. Away from the drawing rooms of Paris and the immediate pressures of courtship, his letters flowed with an honesty that was both vulnerable and passionate. He wrote to her about the Italian countryside he was discovering, describing olive groves that shimmered silver in the afternoon sun and ancient villages perched on hillsides like jewels scattered by some benevolent giant. But more than geography, he wrote about how every beautiful sight made him wish she were there to share it with him. His military victories, when he mentioned them at all, were described not with the pride of conquest, but with the weary satisfaction of duty fulfilled. He told her about crossing rivers swollen with spring rain and negotiating mountain passes where the air grew thin and crystalline. He wrote of soldiers who sang as they marched, and of evenings when the entire army would fall silent to listen to a single nightingale calling from some hidden grove. These were not the dispatches of a conqueror drunk on glory, but the observations of a sensitive soul who happened to excel at the art of war. But it was when Napoleon wrote about missing her that his letters became something approaching poetry. He told Joséphine that her absence was like trying to read by moonlight when one had grown accustomed to the full brightness of the sun. He described waking each morning with the momentary confusion of reaching for her, before remembering that miles and mountains lay between them. He wrote that victory parades felt hollow when there was no one in the crowd whose smile could make all the ceremony worthwhile. Joséphine treasured every word, but she also understood that love letters required responses that were equally thoughtful and revealing. She wrote to him about the changing seasons in Paris, how spring was painting the city in soft pastels that reminded her of the colors in a child's watercolor box. She told him about the garden she was cultivating behind their house, where she was learning the patience required to coax roses into bloom, and the satisfaction that came from watching something beautiful grow under careful tending. Her letters also carried news of the social and political currents flowing through the capital. Joséphine moved through Parisian society with even greater confidence now that she bore the Bonaparte name, and she had become an astute observer of the personalities and intrigues that shaped the nation's future. She wrote to Napoleon about conversations overheard at dinner parties and insights gleaned from careful observation, providing him with intelligence that was often more valuable than official military dispatches. But like her husband, Joséphine saved her most honest thoughts for the quiet moments when she wrote about how much she missed him. She told him about the chair by the fire that remained empty each evening, about conversations she found herself beginning only to remember he wasn't there to hear them. She wrote about dreams where they were together again, so vivid that waking felt like losing him all over again. Her letters carried the scent of the lavender she kept in her writing desk, a small sensory reminder of home that would cling to the paper during its long journey to wherever Napoleon might be camped. As spring deepened into summer, their correspondence developed rhythms and rituals that helped bridge the physical distance between them. Napoleon would write to her every evening after the day's military duties were complete, often by the light of a single candle in his command tent. The sound of his pen scratching against paper became as familiar as his own breathing, a meditation that helped him transition from the harsh realities of campaign life to the softer world of memory and longing. Joséphine established her own writing schedule, setting aside the same hour each day to craft her responses to his letters and to share her own observations about life in their temporarily separate worlds. She wrote at the small desk in their bedroom, surrounded by reminders of their brief time together as newlyweds. The morning light that streamed through the windows seemed to approve of her dedication, warming the paper and making the ink flow smoothly from her pen. Their letters began to create a parallel relationship that existed entirely in words and imagination, a marriage conducted through the postal service, but no less real for its unusual circumstances. They shared jokes that spanned weeks between setup and punchline, developed pet names that would have seemed silly to anyone else but carried profound meaning between them, and created a private language of references and allusions that made each letter feel like a secret conversation in a crowded room. Napoleon wrote to Joséphine about his dreams of returning to Paris, describing in detail the evening he planned for their reunion. He would arrive unannounced, he told her, slipping into the house like a thief in the night to surprise her as she sat reading by the fire. He imagined the look on her face when she realized he was really there, not just another figment of wishful thinking, but flesh and blood and eager arms ready to hold her again. These fantasies sustained him through long marches and longer nights when sleep proved elusive. Joséphine replied with her own dreams of his homecoming, painting pictures with words of the feast she would prepare and the stories she would save to tell him face to face rather than commit to paper. She wrote about redecorating their bedroom with new curtains in his favorite shade of blue, and about the book of poetry she was reading so they could discuss it together when he returned. Her letters created a vision of domestic happiness so vivid that Napoleon could almost smell the cooking and hear her laughter echoing through familiar rooms. But their correspondence also revealed the challenges that separation imposed on even the strongest love. There were letters that crossed in transit, creating confusion when Napoleon responded to news that Joséphine had already corrected or clarified in a subsequent communication. There were delays in the postal service that left both of them wondering if something terrible had happened, imagining accidents or illness that existed only in the anxious spaces between letters. Joséphine wrote to Napoleon about the loneliness that sometimes overwhelmed her, despite her active social life and the constant stream of visitors to their house. She described evenings when the silence felt too heavy to bear, and mornings when she woke, reaching for him, only to find cold sheets and empty space. She was honest about her moments of doubt, wondering if love could truly survive such prolonged separation, or if they were asking too much of their newly formed bond. Napoleon's responses to these vulnerable confessions revealed depths of tenderness that his public reputation never suggested. He wrote to her about his own moments of despair, times when military success felt meaningless without her there to share it. He told her about sitting alone in his tent after particularly difficult battles, staring at her latest letter until the words blurred with exhaustion, but finding in those carefully penned lines the strength to continue. Their letters also carried practical concerns that reminded them both of the ordinary responsibilities that continued even during extraordinary separations. Napoleon worried about finances and asked detailed questions about household expenses and social obligations. Joséphine wrote to him about decisions that required his input, from repairs needed on the house to investments that might secure their future. These mundane matters, woven through their passionate declarations, created a portrait of a marriage that was both deeply romantic and refreshingly realistic. As summer began its slow transition toward autumn, their correspondence took on new urgency as rumors reached Paris that the Italian campaign might soon conclude successfully. Joséphine found herself caught between excitement at the prospect of Napoleon's return and anxiety about whether their reunion would live up to the expectations they had built through months of letters. She worried that the husband who came home might be changed by victory and responsibility, no longer the young general who had courted her with such earnest intensity. Napoleon wrestled with similar concerns, wondering if the woman he had married would find him altered by the experiences of command and the weight of the reputation he was building across Europe. He wrote to Joséphine about his fears that success might create distance between them, that the Napoleon Bonaparte, who was becoming famous in the newspapers, might be a stranger to the Napoleon who had fallen in love over autumn conversations and winter walks. Yet, beneath these natural anxieties lay a foundation of trust that their correspondence had only strengthened. Through hundreds of letters, they had learned to be completely honest with each other about their fears and hopes, their moments of strength and their times of weakness. They had created an intimacy that was perhaps deeper than what they might have achieved if they had remained physically together, because separation had forced them to rely entirely on words and imagination to maintain their connection. The letters they exchanged during the final weeks of the Italian campaign carried a different energy, charged with anticipation and planning for their reunion. Napoleon wrote detailed descriptions of his journey home, calculating exactly when his duties would release him and how many days the trip to Paris would require. Joséphine responded with her own preparations, describing the welcome she was planning and the changes she had made to their house during his absence. But perhaps the most touching aspect of their correspondence during this period was how it revealed their mutual concern for each other's well-being during the transition back to shared life. Napoleon wrote to Joséphine about his worries that months of military routine had made him too rigid, too accustomed to command to easily resume the give and take of married life. Joséphine replied with reassurances that love had its own wisdom for healing whatever small wounds separation might have inflicted. Their final letters before his return were love letters in the truest sense, free from practical concerns and focused entirely on the emotions that had sustained them through their months apart. Napoleon wrote to his wife about how their separation had taught him that happiness was not something to be conquered, but something to be received with gratitude. Joséphine wrote to her husband about how waiting for him had shown her that the deepest love was not possessive, but patient, not demanding, but trusting. When Napoleon's final letter arrived, announcing that he was already on the road home and would arrive within days, Joséphine held the paper against her heart and felt the culmination of months of longing and faith. The young general who had left Paris as her new husband was returning as a proven commander. But more importantly, he was returning as the man who had learned to express love through absence as eloquently as he had through presence. The love story that had begun in a Parisian salon and continued through an Italian campaign was about to enter its next chapter, where letters would give way to embraces and imagination would surrender to the sweet reality of being together once again. Their correspondence had created a bridge across time and distance, proving that some connections are strong enough to span continents and patient enough to wait for perfect moments to bloom into even greater happiness. The autumn of 1797 brought with it a crispness to the Parisian air that seemed to mirror the anticipation coursing through Joséphine's veins. Every morning, she would wake with the same hopeful flutter in her chest, wondering if this might be the day when the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestone would announce not just another visitor to her salon, but the return of the husband whose absence had taught her the true weight of love. She had grown accustomed to measuring time not by the calendar hanging in her dressing room, but by the rhythm of letters arriving and departing, each one a small lifeline thrown across the vast distance that separated her heart from its other half. The house itself seemed to hold its breath in preparation for Napoleon's homecoming. Joséphine had spent weeks overseeing small improvements and adjustments, not because anything was truly wrong, but because keeping busy helped quiet the restless energy that made sitting still feel almost impossible. She had new curtains hung in their bedroom, the deep blue silk catching the afternoon light in ways that reminded her of Napoleon's eyes when he was deep in thought. The garden behind the house bloomed with late roses that she had coaxed into a final flourishing, wanting everything to be perfect for the moment when he would walk through their door once again. Her days had taken on a particular quality during these final weeks of waiting, each hour stretching like taffy, while somehow also racing past with alarming speed. She would find herself pausing in the middle of ordinary tasks, struck by the sudden realization that soon these solitary moments would be shared once again. The simple act of choosing what dress to wear each morning had become an exercise in hope, as she selected colors and fabrics that would please not just herself, but the husband who existed now more in memory and correspondence than in physical presence. The children, Eugène and Hortense, had grown during Napoleon's absence in ways both visible and subtle. They were taller, certainly, but also more thoughtful, as though living with their mother's patient longing had taught them something about the nature of love that could not be learned from books or lessons. They asked about their stepfather with genuine affection, having been won over completely by his earnest attention during their brief courtship period. Eugène, now approaching the age where young men begin to dream of glory and adventure, spoke of Napoleon with admiration that bordered on hero worship. Hortense, with the intuitive wisdom that seemed to belong particularly to daughters, had appointed herself as guardian of her mother's spirits during the long months of separation. She would bring Joséphine small gifts throughout the day: a flower picked from the garden, a drawing made during her lessons, or simply her presence during those quiet evening hours when the house felt too large and too empty. The girl seemed to understand instinctively that waiting required its own kind of courage, and she offered her support with the gentle persistence of someone wise beyond her years. The social obligations that had once filled Joséphine's days with pleasant distractions now felt like elaborate performances, where she played the role of a woman content with her circumstances while privately counting the hours until her real life could resume. She attended dinner parties and afternoon gatherings, accepting congratulations on her husband's military successes with gracious smiles that never quite reached her eyes. People spoke of Napoleon's victories with the casual enthusiasm reserved for distant entertainments, not understanding that each battle mentioned was a reminder of dangers faced and overcome by the man whose safe return had become her most fervent prayer. And so we reach the gentle close of this timeless tale, where love proved stronger than armies and letters became bridges across impossible distances. Napoleon and Joséphine's story reminds us that the greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when two hearts choose each other again and again, through separation and reunion, through doubt and faith, through all the beautiful complexities that make love both fragile and eternal. As you drift toward sleep tonight, carry with you the warmth of their devotion, the patience of their waiting, and the joy of their eventual embrace. Let their love story become part of your dreams, where all separations end in reunion and all letters find their way home. Sweet dreams, and may your own heart know such tender constancy.